Hey everybody, Pastor Brendan coming to you on this Good Friday where everybody's hair is longer, as you can see, and our patients are maybe growing a little bit more thin. So yesterday was Maundy Thursday, and I hope you tuned in and listened and heard God's Word read and enjoyed that. Today we're going to kind of continue in the same vein, going through the happenings of Good Friday. If you're like me, you're probably thinking, well, why in the world is Good Friday called that? Why do we call Good Friday good when some of the stuff that happened on it was absolutely horrible? So the etymology, or the word idea, so the origin of the word is what etymology means, is simply that our word for good used to mean holy. And so Holy Friday, in other words. And Friday, Good Friday, is absolutely holy. I mean, what happened on Good Friday would never happen again. It never happened before, and it would never, ever, ever happen again in the history of all the world. Jesus, the Son of God, the God-man, would be tortured, ridiculed, spit on, scourged, crucified, murdered, and laid in a tomb. That would never happen again, because what Christ did was a once and for all eternal accomplishment. And so as I read today, I want us to take that into consideration. We're going to be reading through the story of what Christ endured on Good Friday. And as I read this time, I'm going to do a little bit more pausing and talking about some things. Unlike on Maundy Thursday, I just kind of read straight through because we sort of already had an idea of what I wanted to emphasize with the ideas of foot washing and the institution of the new covenant by the Lord's Supper, or communion as we call it. And so there are some aspects of the crucifixion that a lot of the time we don't take into consideration because we're just never taught it. We don't think about it. We don't see people being crucified like they were seeing it happen during the Roman rule at that time. And so hope what I explain just adds to understanding what Christ went through to secure your salvation. And so if you would turn in Matthew to chapter 27, we're going to continue through Good Friday. Matthew 27, 1 through 61 is what I'm going to be reading. And this is God's perfect and powerful word to you. This is Matthew 27, verses 1 through 61. When morning came, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. They bound him and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate, the governor. Then when Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he changed his mind and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders, saying, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." And they said, "What is that to us? See to it yourself." And throwing down the pieces of silver into the temple, he departed and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the pieces of silver, said, "It is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since it is blood money." So they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. Therefore that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken by the prophet Jeremiah, saying, "And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him on whom a price had been set by some of the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me." Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You have said so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." Now the chief priests and elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They all said, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." I just want to pause here and talk about crucifixion a little bit. So what was crucifixion? Many of us know that Jesus was nailed to a cross, but what did he really endure? Well, what happened when you were crucified was that you would be stripped of all your clothes, so you'd be naked, humiliated in front of all the people, and your arms would be stretched out on the cross beam, as you see the cross up above me, would be stretched out on the cross beam like this, and your feet would go down and they would be rested like this. And what would happen is the Romans would come and then they would nail into each of your wrists about right here. And then when your feet were like this, they would nail a nail through both of your feet to the upright beam. And the nails weren't just like woodworking nails that we see now. They were about 5 to 7 inches in length, real thick iron nails that would be driven into the bones of your feet through meat and tendons and through nerves. And it would just be excruciating. And what would happen is they would lift you up and you'd get jarred, and so it would cause even more pain in those nails where they had been pierced through your skin and bone. And as you hung there, you would hang like this, and you would, by just gravity, fall forward and compress your lungs. And so unless you were able to pull yourself up by your wrists or push yourself up by the nail in your feet, you would eventually suffocate because of the compression of your lungs. And so that is really what they're talking about here. That is what makes what the Jews wanted for Jesus so terrible. They wanted him to be crucified. So let's continue reading. So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." And all the people answered, "His blood be on us and our children." Then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. So as if crucifixion wasn't enough, Jesus was scourged. Now, we read the word scourged, and really we just typically pass over it. But being scourged was possibly even more painful and worse than even being crucified. A lot of people didn't make it past being scourged to even get to the cross that they would be crucified on. What scourging was you would be whipped. Well, first you'd be tied to a post, kind of like this, and so your back and even your legs would be exposed to the whip. And the person who would be whipping you was called a lictor. And what they would do is they would take this whip with all kind of different barbs on it, maybe not barbs, but strands that had little metal balls on it. They had sharp bone, even shards of metal on it. And as they would whip you, not only would it bruise you from the balls, but would also stick into your skin. And as they pulled it back to start another whip, it would tear open and leave strands of hanging flesh. And sometimes it would rip your tendons, cut your tendons on the back of your legs. And even expose internal organs in your backbone because of how much flesh that it would tear open, cause an extreme bleeding, and the pain would be unbearable. It would actually probably put your body into shock. And so this is what Jesus endured, but then he even endures more before getting to the cross. Let's continue. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole battalion before him. And they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and put a reed in his hand, and kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they spit on him and took the reed and struck him on the head, pushing the thorns into his head even deeper. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him and led him away to crucify him. And as they went out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name, and they compelled this man to carry his cross. And now the reason Simon would have had to carry Jesus' cross was because of the physical state that he would have been in. It was amazing that Jesus would even be able to walk to the cross, let alone carry the crossbeam. Now the uprights were already there at Golgotha, but Jesus would have had to carry his crossbeam, as was the custom for the prisoner or the criminal to carry it. And the crossbeam would have been anywhere from 75 to 125 pounds, maybe even more or less. But to try and consider carrying a 75-pound weight, 75-pound rough piece of wood even in that state would have been crazy. Or 125 pounds at that. And so to have someone carry your cross in that moment would have been the only way Jesus would have made it to Golgotha. And so that's what they do. They have Simon carry Jesus' cross for him. And they go on to Golgotha. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. Then they sat down and kept watch over him there, and over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left, and those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." So also the chief priests and scribes and elders mocked him, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him." He trusted in God. Let God deliver him now, if he desires him. For he said, "I am the Son of God," and the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?" That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders hearing it said, "This man is calling Elijah." And one of them at once ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put on a reed and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him." And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. When the centurion and those who were with him keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, "Truly this was the Son of God." There were also many women there looking on from a distance who had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him, among whom were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who also was a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered to be given to him. And Joseph took the body and wrapped it in clean linen shroud and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut in the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the tomb. So that is Good Friday. Our Lord was crucified, died, and was buried. And his dead body lay there awaiting Easter morning. So as you ponder what we've just read, as you think on it and meditate on it, just consider all that Jesus went through in order to secure your salvation and the salvation of all of those who would believe. And really rest in the fact that all he endured was to bring us the great glory and the wonders of what was coming on Easter morning. And until then, God bless.